Well, are we about to face a worldwide recession? Former Wall Street money manager and financial analyst Ed Dowd just released a new report this weekend called Danger of Deep Worldwide Recession in 2025. And he says the Biden administration basically hid how weak the economy really was in order to win an election, lying to all of us about how bad it really was. The new report shows how a weak economy was propped up under the Biden administration and how a crash this year, he says, is inevitable. What is he talking about? Could it be Biden's 2024 jobs numbers? They just came out. We now know that Biden was lying about the jobs and pretty much everything else. So let's bring in economist Peter St. Onge, who just actually did a fabulous report on X about these jobs numbers, and we'll talk about all of that. Peter, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure.
It's a pleasure. So
go ahead.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Well, I just want to ask you, let's talk first of all about this idea of a worldwide recession, and then I want to drill down on these jobs numbers first. How bad is it? I know people think, a lot of people are thinking, oh, Trump's a savior. Like he's some sort of omnipotent person. He's going to come in within a few weeks and everything's going to be fine. But they've been hinting, and even Elon Musk last summer said it's going to be pretty bad. So are we about are we going to be in for 2 years of hell before anything turns around?
Yeah, so you've got a couple elements here. Generally, economic reforms take time. So you can cut taxes, you can cut regulations. This will all grow your economy, but it doesn't happen overnight. And the trick for Trump is that he's up against the Biden economy. So a lot of what was happening under Biden was either fake or it was bought by government spending. So a lot of the job numbers are fake. We're now getting revisions in the order of 600,000 or 800,000. These are government revisions. These are not tinfoil hat revisions here. So that's suggesting that a lot of the jobs that we thought that we had under Biden aren't actually there. Then meanwhile, you've got another side of it, which is that by all accounts, Biden was dumping out government spending. He had deficits of something like $2 trillion. You can buy a lot of GDP with that, and then it can look like your economy is doing quite well, but of course you are going bankrupt buying growth that way. So yes, Trump is suggesting all of the right things to grow the economy. He's suggesting cutting taxes, cutting the burden of government, also regulations. But the question is how long does that take, and is it going to be enough to counter what Ed Dowd is worried about, which is the Biden sort of the overhang from the Biden takeover of the economy and sort of goosing the numbers?
Well, I don't think there's a way to recover from a perverted economy based on lies that would not be painful. You posted something on X. Would you sort of, would you be able to cope with this correction if you knew that then it would make things better in the future? And I think about the economy that we're going to hand off to our children would be based on a pie in the sky. So is there any other way to do this than just do it the hard way?
Yeah, well, you alluded to that earlier when Elon Musk was warning that some of the reforms that we're going to need from here out are going to be temporarily painful. An interesting data point is what happened at Argentina. So Javier Milei cut something like a third of the government budget, roughly 6% of GDP is what he cut, which is a massive amount of spending to cut. He laid off, in U.S. terms, something like 500,000 government workers. Now, what you got out of that was about a 3.5% recession, which is pretty bad. However, the following year now, the forecasts for next year growth are about 8.5%. Okay, so the trick here is that if you're going to fix our economy, right, if you're going to reduce the footprint of government, if you're going to mass deport a lot of these illegal aliens who are massive fiscal drains, you are going to get a reduction in paper GDP. However, that's going to make you a lot wealthier. Moreover, it's very temporary. If we look at what happened in Argentina, that was absolutely shock therapy. That's the best case scenario of what we might get here in the States, is something on the scale of what Milei did. And even that, the recession lasted 1 year, and now they're looking at 8.5% growth. Markets are soaring, bonds are soaring, which is something you haven't seen in Argentina in a long time. So we need the medicine. And, I posted something you mentioned earlier, which was looking at Menlo Bear, at his followers. And he's, a very sort of sober analyst. And he asked his people, if in order to make these reforms and the spending cuts, if we were going to get a recession and a market correction of something like 30%, would that be okay? Would you accept that? He had about almost 90% of people said, bring it. I think at this point, Americans, we have been through a lot. We have been sort of horrified at what's happening to our country. And a lot of people are willing to suffer some pain if we're actually going to reform and get onto a path where America is great again, meaning that we can start building wealth, we can bring manufacturing back to the country, we can replace this government takeover with a healthy economy that's actually generating jobs for Americans.
It seems like we never really went through the pain that we were supposed to go through. Like it's been artificially propped up and held together with duct tape. And so we've never really, when we went through all of this massive money printing, even after the 2008 collapse, it's still never, we really never went through it fully. It was never allowed to feel the pain. We kept the patient sort of artificially alive, it seems like. So if we are fully going to go through it, and we all just need to buck up and just get ready, it's going to be bad. How bad will it be?
And an addendum to that, will they blame Trump for it? Do you think?
Oh, of course.
Will the media blame Trump for it?
Guaranteed. Well, we're talking about this job report that just came out, and it was covering the period before Trump was in office. But of course, media slavishly put it out as Trump's first job report because there was a lot of garbage in there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's been the pattern. There's a great book by Jim Grant called The Forgotten Depression. He talks about the 1919 depression. That was after World War I, with a massive collapse in government spending. So this caused sort of mechanically a recession. And back then, the government did absolutely nothing about it. It was a very, very sharp recession. It lasted about 6 months. And then we had the roaring 20s. We had 10 years of return on that. Unfortunately, our leaders don't have those kinds of balls anymore. So at this point, they do exactly what you're saying. Every single time we get a crisis, whether it's 2001, we had the dot-com crash, 9/11 hit at the same time, whether it's 2008, where, of course, the banks screwed up the economy, whether it was COVID, every single time, rather than taking the medicine and clearing out the bad parts of the system, in 2008 especially, we should have let all the banks go bust and let them get bought for a song out of bankruptcy. Instead of taking that tough medicine, they dump out trillions of dollars, a lot of that financed by the Federal Reserve. That's really what makes this possible. But the end result is that the economy sort of gunks up. It's like Alzheimer's disease or something where you just get clogged up. And if you want to see what the future of that is, you can see that very clearly in Europe. Europe has been even worse than the U.S. on that count. And they don't produce anything. They have no national champions. There's no technology leader has come out of Europe in 50 plus years. So that is our future. That was the path that we were on with Biden-Harris. The question is, how quickly can Trump change it? Most important, can he keep the people on his side? So that's, I think, one of the most fascinating aspects of the 2024 election is that the legacy media did everything they could. They were talking about the Austrian corporal. That used to be pretty taboo, but they were banging on about that 24/7. They pulled out all the stops and they failed. And so a lot of what happens in Washington, right, a lot of the spineless Republicans and the uniparty, a lot of this stuff is because traditionally politicians of both parties have been deathly afraid of the news media and the news media's ability to brainwash voters, to gaslight them into, in practice, the point of view of the left. So at this point, that's going to be the big question. If we look at what's happening with Trump right now, it's a full court press. The legacy media hates Doge. They're pumping out all this. They hate his tax cuts. They hate everything about Trump. It's not working. There was a CBS poll just the other day that found that Trump's popularity is rising. It's rising among traditionally Democrat groups. Meanwhile, Republican voters are hardcore MAGA. There's another article just came out today how senators, GOP senators, are quote unquote terrified of Trump and Doge, right? If you look at Trump 1.0, they were laughing at Trump. They were blocking him every chance they got. He couldn't get anything through. He barely got his tax cuts through. So I think it's a very different world now. And one of the keys to that is that legacy media's power has absolutely collapsed. So I think gives us a lot more sort of play space in Washington to actually get serious structural changes.
Right. So you mentioned the jobs report. You did a fantastic video about it this morning. One of the things that stuck out to me was the highest unemployment rates were amongst teenagers. Now, something Thomas Sowell always says is when you have teenagers with nothing good to do, nothing good happens, and no good economy can be built around that. And the YouGov poll, CBS YouGov poll that you just mentioned, shows a rising approval for Republicans for Trump. So why do you think Democrats frame this as something that is cruel, this, replacing jobs with illegal immigration, when it's actually cruel to a population they are totally ignoring?
That's been one of the fascinating stories of the past decade, is that the Democrats had always been for the little guy, right? They had been for blue-collar workers, union members, people who work with their hands, teenagers, people who are marginally attached to the labor force. That had always been their bread and butter. And they've completely sold them out at this point, where they are siding with the corporations. They're siding with, big ag and big corporations that want to import cheap labor. And so that's now given us an economy here where blue collar workers and teenagers, right? These are people who are traditionally low skill. They need those first couple rungs on the ladder. And what they're finding is that the first dozen rungs on the ladder are being occupied by illegals who are working minimum wage. So, the left says, Americans don't want these jobs. Well, no, they don't want them at minimum wage. No, they don't. Right. And so the key here is that you get these illegals out, right? Because currently you have literal third worlders competing with Americans for those first rungs of the ladder. Well, what happens is teenagers can't get job skills. People who are marginally attached, whether it's in cities or in sort of Rust Belt towns, so-called, none of these people can get the first rung on the ladder, so they can't move up into managerial positions. So I think it's sort of shocking the degree to which the Democrat Party sold out its base. After the election outcome here, I think they kind of looked at 2016 as a sucker punch. Like, they weren't ready for it. Trump kind of snuck in. They didn't expect it. But at this point, they very much did everything they could to stop Trump. They failed. I think in a sane world, they would sit back and say, okay, maybe we need to go back to that old left. We need to champion the working class, the little guy. And instead, it looks like they're just doubling down on the identity BS. And, their sort of current push right now seems to be a life or death defense of foreign aid, which is one of the least popular things that the government spends on. They've completely lost their minds. They're supposed to be the smart ones. They've got all the academics and whatnot on the payroll, but they're it's spectacular how badly they're doing right now, that they just have zero creativity. That maybe because they're terrified of their own activists. They've spent so long, playing along with the gender business and all that they're just afraid to have an independent thought. But it's quite exciting for the MAGA movement. Just Washington is rolling over. The opposition has been completely incompetent.
Yeah, and maybe the antidote for them right now is, we heard from Andy Kim, Democrat, this weekend. He basically said, you guys want to push this through, we're going to shut down the government, which is exactly like, please do that. Like, that's exactly what Republicans want.
Yeah, don't throw me in that briar patch.
Like, that sounds fun. Peter
With
St.
enemies like that, who needs friends? Yeah,
exactly. Follow the professor on X. He does a fabulous job breaking down what's going on economically right now, and this jobs report. These numbers are just stunning. The hidden jobs report that the Biden administration kept from us. Peter, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me on.